If you watched the last video, you know Japan spent over a century tearing itself apart. Warlords rising, alliances breaking, entire clans being wiped out overnight. It was chaos, brutal, fascinating chaos. This is the story of how one man took a country that had just emerged from a century of civil war and built a system so airtight it lasted 265 years. To understand Tokugawa Ieyasu, you have to understand where he came from, because his entire personality, his entire political philosophy was shaped by a childhood that should have destroyed him. He was born in 1543, the son of a minor daimyo of the Matsudaira clan, a small clan with modest territory, not particularly important. And when Ieyasu was 6 years old, his father was murdered. 6 years old, the clan fell apart immediately. At age 9, he was taken hostage. The Imagawa clan, a far more powerful family, used him as leverage over what remained of the Matsudaira. For 5 years, from age 9 to 14, Ieyasu lived as a political prisoner in the Imagawa household. Now, here's what's interesting. Most people in that situation either break or become bitter. Ieyasu did neither. He watched, he studied how power actually worked, how alliances formed, how loyalty was bought and lost, how a strong clan could collapse if the wrong decisions were made at the wrong time. He was essentially getting a masterclass in Japanese politics as a hostage. And then Oda Nobunaga, who we covered in the last episode, defeated the Imagawa clan, and Ieyasu walked free. He was 14, he had nothing, and he immediately started building. Ieyasu allied with Oda Nobunaga. This is the move that defined the next 30 years of his life, picking the right side early and staying on it. Under Nobunaga, Ieyasu was a valuable ally. He fought in campaigns, expanded his own territory, and built up his military strength, but he was always second, always a supporting actor. When Nobunaga was assassinated in 1582, Toyotomi Hideyoshi seized control, and suddenly Ieyasu found himself in a much more complicated position. He actually fought against Hideyoshi initially, which tells you something about his confidence, but when it became clear Hideyoshi had the upper hand, Ieyasu switched sides. Hideyoshi never fully trusted him, and that's important, because Hideyoshi's solution to the Ieyasu problem is one of great miscalculations in Japanese history. Rather than eliminating him, Hideyoshi gave Ieyasu control of 8 provinces in the Kanto region of eastern Japan, far from the capital, far from the center of power. The idea was simple: put him somewhere he can't cause trouble. What actually happened? Ieyasu used those 8 provinces to build the most powerful military and economic base in Japan. He conquered daimyo hostile to Hideyoshi, expanded his territory, and quietly turned the Kanto into his personal power base. Hideyoshi placed Ieyasu in exile. Ieyasu turned exile into an empire. When Hideyoshi died in 1598, he left behind a 5-year-old heir and a council of regents to govern until the boy came of age. Ieyasu was one of those regents. He immediately started making alliances quietly, carefully, exactly the way a man who spent 5 years as a hostage and 30 years waiting learns to move. On October 21st, 1600, everything came to a head. The Battle of Sekigahara, the largest battle in Japan's history before World War II. Tokugawa's forces on one side, a coalition of clans loyal to Hideyoshi's heir on the other. It lasted one day. Tokugawa won. And just like that, after decades of patience, after childhood as a hostage, after 30 years of being second, Ieyasu was the sole ruler of Japan. In 1603, the emperor formally named him Shogun. The Tokugawa Shogunate was established. The century of civil war was over. But here's where Ieyasu's story gets really interesting, because winning wasn't enough for him. He'd watched too many powerful men rise and fall. He knew that a regime built on military victory alone wouldn't last, so he set about building something that would. The first thing Ieyasu did was move the capital. Kyoto had the imperial capital for centuries. It was the emperor's city, the symbolic heart of Japan. Ieyasu moved his government to Edo, modern-day Tokyo, deep in Tokugawa territory, far from the emperor's court. This wasn't just a logistical decision, it was a statement. The real power now lived in Edo, not Kyoto. The emperor still existed, but Ieyasu was careful never to challenge the emperor directly. But the emperor was being sidelined, kept as a symbol while the shogunate ran the country. Edo itself was built around the Edo Castle, one of the largest in Japan, and it was designed as a military city from the ground up. Thousands of samurai loyal to Ieyasu garrisoned it. Within 100 years, it would become one of the largest cities in the world. Then came political reorganization. Japan was divided into roughly 270 domains, each controlled by a daimyo. Ieyasu directly controlled about 25% of the country. The most productive and strategically important regions included Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka. His allies received the rest. The lands of his enemies were confiscated and redistributed. Peasants couldn't leave their province without the lord's permission. The road network, the Gokaido, 5 major highways, was patrolled by shogunate troops. All travel to and from Edo followed these roads. The shogunate could monitor, control, and if necessary, shut down movements across the entire country. But the most clever piece of this system was what Ieyasu did to the daimyo themselves. The daimyo were the one group that could realistically threaten Tokugawa power. They had armies, they had territory, they had loyalty from their own people. So Ieyasu built a system specifically designed to exhaust them. It was called the Sankin-kotai, alternate attendance. Every daimyo was required to spend every second year in Edo, at the shogun's court. When they returned to their home domains, their families stayed behind in Edo, essentially as hostages. Think about what this meant in practice. The daimyo had to maintain 2 households, one in their home domain and one in Edo. The journey between them, with the full entourage of a lord was expected to travel with, was enormously expensive. The cost of travel, the cost of maintaining a residence in one of the most expensive cities in the world year after year, draining their wealth. And while they were in Edo, they weren't in their home territory. They weren't building alliances. They weren't training their armies. They weren't planning anything. On top of that, they couldn't marry without the shogun's approval, no forming alliances through marrying without permission, couldn't build or repair castles without shogunate support, couldn't do anything that would increase their independent power without going through Ieyasu. Every single rule pointed in the same direction: keep the daimyo weak, watched, independent. In 1623, the third Tokugawa shogun implemented Sakoku, the isolation policy. Japan closed itself off from the world. No Japanese citizen was allowed to travel abroad without permission. No foreign ships, with a few exceptions, were allowed to trade. The only port open to foreigners was Nagasaki, and only Chinese, Korean, and Dutch merchants were permitted. Every other European power was expelled. Why? Same logic as everything else. Foreign trade meant wealth flowing to the daimyo independently of the shogunate. Foreign ideas, particularly European ones, could undermine the political order. And there was one foreign idea in particular that Ieyasu and his successors found genuinely threatening: Christianity. From 1614 to 1637, the Tokugawa Shogunate systemically suppressed Christianity in Japan. The reason wasn't purely religious, it was political. Christianity demanded loyalty to the Pope above all earthly rulers in a system built entirely on loyalty to the shogun. That was unacceptable. In 1614, all foreign missionaries were expelled, Christian converts executed. Every Japanese family was required to register at a Buddhist temple each year and prove they weren't Christian. And then in 1637, a group of Christians in southern Japan had enough. The Shimabara rebellion and uprising in Kyushu, driven by a combination of religious persecution and economic grievance, the shogunate crushed it. Around 37,000 people were killed. After Shimabara, Christianity in Japan effectively disappeared for the next 2 centuries. Those who continued to practice did so entirely in secret. So what do you take away from all this? Tokugawa Ieyasu was not the greatest warrior of his age. He was not the most charismatic leader. He wasn't even the most powerful man in Japan for most of his life. What he was a student of power, a man who spent his entire childhood watching how systems worked, and then spent the rest of his life building and had the most complete system of control Japan had ever seen. Every reform, every restriction, every policy traced back to the same insight he learnt as a 9-year-old hostage. Power is fragile, and the only way to make it last is to design a system where challenging it becomes structurally impossible. It worked for 265 years. The Tokugawa Shogunate only ended in 1868, when American warships arrived in Tokyo Bay and forced Japan to open its borders, but that's a story for another video. And keep in mind, 1868 was not that long ago. It wasn't even 200 years ago, 150 years at most. If you found this interesting, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.